So the optics of leading, perception versus reality. Looking at it from the perspective of optics, what are we talking about? Optics is simply someone's perception of a certain situation or of a certain other person. And as leaders, we need to be aware of what those perceptions are. And in society where there is such a huge gap, I'm seeing anyway, on the varying perceptions that people have of a given situation or a person, a leader's role partially is to be able to take those varying perceptions and bring everyone together, to unify them into one true reality, to bring that unit forward into growth. So whenever we understand that people will have varying perceptions, they can see the same things, but will have varying perceptions about that situation, then we can better lead them forward into something good and healthy. Does that make sense? So how do we form these leaders? How do we transform leaders to being those who can take all those different perceptions and bridge that gap to reality? That's truly what we need from our leaders in today's society, especially whenever there's so much division. We need some unification, right? And I really love the idea of transformation. That was kind of my word a couple of years ago. I always choose a word each year to be my word to stand on. And a few years ago, I chose the word transformation. And I use that a lot because I do feel like as a leader, I want to retain the essence of who I am, but transform into my full potential. And that is what I'm really passionate about, is helping others to take the essence of who they are to transform into their full potential as a leader, because our leadership skills, all those things under that big umbrella of leadership skills and knowledge is what we need to really bring us together, to transform into that person. So let's see. Through my career and through my life, I've found that there is actually a cycle. There's different stages to transformation. And I want to be able to share that with you today, because I usually like to start that off, because I'm about transforming your lives today in some very, very small way by bringing some awareness and understanding about this topic, about how perceptions play into how we behave and how we use that to lead people well. And if we understand that cycle, we can flow through it a lot more effectively and a lot more expeditiously to really make an impact in this world in some healthy ways. So the first thing we need to be aware of is that the first phase of transformation is awareness. Hang on. I'm sorry, guys. I'm having some difficulty with my laptop. So whenever we live in our echo chambers, many times we don't know what we don't know. And I can tell you from my own experience, growing up in South Central Louisiana, small town girl, I didn't know what I didn't know. But as I started growing in my career, the only image that I had of what a leader was were those bosses around me, or what I saw on TV. And this was a long time ago, back in the 80s and 90s. So the styles of leadership and what we saw in society was not really healthy in many aspects. What I typically saw as a leader was a boss, someone in a higher position of authority over me, and it was generally a staunchy old man who was barking orders. And that's what I thought leadership was, because that was my only level of awareness. But if we are going to transform into something greater, we have to get outside of our echo chambers, get beyond our geographical areas, beyond our friend circle or the organization that we work with, just to kind of take a look around and see what else is out there. And for me, it wasn't until I started advancing in my career and started going to conferences and workshops, things like this, like Innovate South, where I started getting glimmers of these other leaders. And they were actually kind. And they were inviting me in to grow and encouraging me. And it seemed so foreign to me. But it did pique my interest. It broadened my awareness of how leadership is done, right? And so that made me curious. But the awareness can't stop at just that. We can expand that, which is going to help us to be better problem solvers, so we have different ideas to pull on for a situation. However, we need to go beyond that. We need to be able to go to a level of deeper understanding about that situation. So whenever it comes to leadership for me, that's whenever I began really digging in to study leadership and reading things from people like Stephen Covey and Zig Ziglar and Marcus Buckingham. And I'll be honest with you, my celebrity crushes as far as thought leaders today are Simon Sinek and Brene Brown. So if anybody is familiar with Simon Sinek or Brene Brown, find your feedback button and do like the applause thing for me. Because for me, Brene Brown really gave me permission to do a lot of the work that I do today. And that has really helped me to grow personally, as well as professionally. So once we have that fuller, deeper level of understanding about that area that we're focusing on, then that's what's going to really drive our passions, right? That's what's going to really motivate us to do something. But we need to understand that we cannot love, appreciate, and respect someone or something if we don't understand them. So as leaders, it's incumbent upon us to do the work to understand the people who we are trying to lead. Does that make sense? Thumbs up or something? So as we're fueling that passion, we need to take the action, right? So all that knowledge, all the head knowledge is not going to do us very much good until we actually start applying it. And we can get really excited. And so just an FYI, I geek out over this stuff, y'all, and I'm Cajun. So you've already seen I talk with my hands, and I may start talking fast. So if my hands are moving so fast that it's blurry, then put it in the chat box or tell me to slow down, and I'd be happy to do that. But coming back to it, we have to apply the action in those areas. And I want to encourage you, in your excitement, don't necessarily dive into the deep end head first without looking. Dip your toe in the water and keep dipping your toe in the water. Take those small, sustainable action steps that's going to lead and form into healthy habits in that area. And keep building from that. That is what's going to give you that sustainable growth, rather than diving in head first, where you may tread water for a little while, but it's usually not sustainable. So making sure that you're taking the action, that's the fourth step. But the third step, but the fourth step is the one that I think most of us neglect. And this is where we fall short. And that is in actual reflection. That we have to stop. There's so much chaos and activity around us. It's a distraction to our growth. So we have to be very purposeful in taking time out of our week or out of our month to do some really intentional reflection. And what do I mean by that? It's so easy to say, yes, I'm reflecting on all the things that have been bad this year or hard, or all the things that I did wrong already in this presentation and how I flubbed, because I will be in my head after this. However, I need to flip that script a little bit and take the time to reflect on, what did I do right? What did I accomplish? How have I grown in some way, shape, or form? It may not be that I attained that specific goal fully that I was looking to achieve. However, how did I grow? How much progress did I make? So we need to be able to acknowledge that for ourselves during this reflection time. What did I actually accomplish? And so once we have that, then we need to be able to celebrate that for ourselves. We're quick to beat ourselves up, but we also need to be just as quick, if not more so, in celebrating ourselves. So even if it's just a little private moment to yourself, a little pat on the back, that you're acknowledging those accomplishments on a visceral level almost, then feel that. Because that's what's going to keep moving you forward, motivating you to keep applying those actions to get you to your goal, right? And then you don't want to ignore the barriers that you encountered, because ultimately, whenever we're doing something good, we will meet some resistance, some barriers. Things won't go quite the way we anticipated them to, and that's okay. But what did you learn from that, and what do you need to tweak or modify in your plan or in your strategy to keep you moving forward to that goal? So I encourage you, at the end of each week, take 10, 15 minutes, break out your calendar, and look at all the great things that happened during that week. Because what's going to bubble up to the surface is that we're going to remember more than likely some of the hard stuff. But let's be very intentional in recognizing the good stuff as well. That's what's going to keep moving us forward and not get us stuck. So 10 to 15 minutes at the end of each week. If you're doing it once a month, schedule some time for yourself, at least, I don't know, an hour, half a day even, once a quarter, or at the very least once a year. We're coming towards the end of the year. Take some time, at least a full day, quiet reflection time for yourself, and go through your entire calendar and pull out all the good things that have happened and how you have grown throughout this year, and focus on those things that's going to bring you forward into 2021. Because whenever you take the time to reflect, that's where the wisdom comes in. That's the good stuff. That's the real value that we have to our lives, is the wisdom that we've gained. That's the growth. And in that wisdom, we go back to awareness. It expands our level of awareness even further, and that cycle continues. Make sense? How are we doing so far? Y'all following me? So, leadership. What is leadership? As I said, we have this huge umbrella, right, of all these skills, all these soft skills that a lot of people say. And I'm here to tell you that the soft skills are the hardest skills that you'll ever develop, because it requires something of us interiorly. But whenever we take all of those skills and all of those things as far as leadership and we distill it down, ultimately all it is someone's ability to influence someone else to do something they would not normally do on their own. And so if we think about it that way, our ability to influence someone else, we can do that in healthy ways or unhealthy ways. But let's take a look at why is that important, and how are their perceptions of us influencing their behaviors. So if we look at it from the perspective of, I'm stepping out as a leader, we need to understand the reality for us is that many times we're placed under a microscope. That when we're just one of those members of the crowd or the team, we're kind of in the mix. Not all eyes are on us. But the minute that we step forward out of the crowd to lead an initiative, whether it's organically or we were pushed in that direction, whether we are given that new position of authority, that new title, then all eyes come on us. And what happens whenever we're placed under a microscope? Do like this. You only see a narrow view of that person or that situation. So we need to understand that reality, that whenever we're stepping up as a leader, we're under that microscope and they're watching all of our moves. It's not always just what we're telling them, it's what we're actually doing. It's in our behaviors, right? So we need to understand that. And what happens is that the perception that other people have of us and the perceptions that we have of them is definitely influencing those interactions, that relationship. So I ask you, what are they seeing in you? Are we putting up this veil, this curtain in front of us of this professional person? I know I struggled with that quite a bit early on, that I thought that I had to be this buttoned up person, that I had to always be completely prepared. And they were never seeing the authentic Monica. So I ask you, whenever people are looking at you from your position of leadership, your position of influence, and whatever that may be, what are they seeing? Are they seeing the authentic you? Or are they seeing some facade that's filtered? Because we need to be able to understand them, but they need to be able to understand us as well. There's nothing wrong with letting them see our authentic self. We need to continue to work on our authentic self to be the best that we possibly can be, to lead well. But people, especially in today's society, want that authenticity. They need to be able to know what is real. And if they're not seeing the real you, how can they trust you? How do they know who you really are and understand who you really are? So if you don't believe me as far as how our perceptions influence our behaviors, take a look at Amazon. So I'd like for all of you who are joining us to think about the last thing that you may have purchased from Amazon. And in that purchase, did you look at the reviews? Raise your hand if you looked at the reviews first, or put it in the chat box. How many of you, yes, how many of you would purchase something from Amazon if it only had a 1-star review? Typically, I check the little filter thing that I only want to see options that have a 4 or higher star rating, right? So understanding that the perception that we have of that product based on the reviews, because we may not have any direct knowledge of that product, but based on the reviews, is influencing our behavior, our purchasing decision, right? But do you know that there are people out there who make livings off of writing Amazon reviews, which may or may not be valid? So that companies will hire someone to write reviews, positive reviews for their own products, and maybe negative reviews for the competition. So how do we know it's real? I mean, I'm still going to look at the Amazon reviews, but just to say that we're allowing other people's perceptions and then our filtered perception based on those reviews to sway our decision, our behaviors. And just a sidebar note, if you want some humor, if you get into like gastric humor, Google the Haribo sugar-free gummy bear Amazon reviews. It's hysterical. And I think it's kind of gotten to be this competition now where people are one-upping each other because there's thousands of them now. But I stumbled upon it a few years ago and I was killing myself laughing. So anyway, Haribo sugar-free gummy bear Amazon reviews. So this just kind of highlights how those perceptions can influence people's behavior towards us as a leader, as well as we need to be aware of our perceptions of other people and how that may be influencing the way we lead them. So what are we doing to ensure that our perceptions are coming closer to center to the real reality, the truth of the situation or the truth of that person? We've got to do the work. But we need to understand how we influence people. And there's different ways that we influence people. And we can do that in those old negative ways. And I say old because I want to believe in my perfect world that everybody is a servant leader and no one would try to influence someone through force, intimidation, or manipulation. Force meaning that they have no other choice but to follow you. Intimidation meaning that it's kind of my way or the highway, and that's what I experienced early on in my career. Or manipulation where somebody's a winner and somebody's a loser, and usually I'm the winner and you're the loser. These might get you some short-term gains for whatever it is that you're looking to achieve, but it's not sustainable. The other types of influence are positional influence or exchange. Positional is a lot where many new leaders start off, where they may not have been equipped to truly lead other people well and understanding that. So they lean more on the position of authority that they have or that title. But people are going to follow you because of that paycheck that you might dangle over their head. And maybe not, you can still be a good person and serve them well, but you're still leaning heavily on that position. So to test that, if you took your position away, if you took the title away from you, would those same people still follow you? And if the answer is no, the influence is not in you, it's in your title or position. Does that make sense? And then exchange is where we're elevating our abilities even more. We're elevating our way of influence people to where it's a win-win. We're both getting something from this relationship that's positive and we're both growing. But we don't stop there. We can go through the level of influence where it's through persuasion. And that kind of sounds a little wonky, but it means that the people have been persuaded that it's beneficial to them, that their lives will be better by their alignment with you and following you. And you do that through your behaviors and your results that you're producing. And then finally, ultimately, the capstone of influence that I feel we should all be striving for is respect. That people are going to follow you because they respect you, because of who you are, the results that you've produced, and how much better their lives have been or can be because of your leadership, that you're equipping them to be leaders as well. And that cycle gets replicated. So, oops, okay, sorry about that. I'm ahead of myself. So you already saw the picture, but here's what I want you to do. So get ready to type in your chat box. I'm going to show you an image, which you've already seen briefly. But in this image, I want you to type in the chat box the very, very first thing that you see. I'm going to count to 3 whenever I show the image. I'm going to count to 3, and on 3, type in the chat box what you see. Okay, y'all ready? 1, 2, 3. Type in the chat box what you see. Okay, so most people were seeing a duck, a bird, okay, a rabbit. Well, Will said he saw the rabbit and the duck. So I want to point out, looking at perceptions, and think about this and put your leadership hat on and how you're working with other people. We're all seeing the same image, the same reality, right? But we're perceiving it differently. Our first vision, our first perception of what we're seeing is different. And there's a reason for that. And I'm going to share that with you in a little bit. And I don't have all the psychology, but if anybody would have seen something other than a duck or a bird or a rabbit, I would really like to have a conversation with you because I want to learn how your brain works. So I'm going to do another one. Will, why do you have to show off? Yeah, I know that's Will. He's just very unique. So I'm going to show you one more image, same concept, where I'm going to flash the image. I'm going to count to 3, and on the count of 3, I'd like for you to put in the chat box what it is that you see. Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3. Will, are you trying to be politically correct? Fumi, you're not supposed to wait on Will. You're supposed to, I didn't want it influenced by what everybody else was saying. Y'all were supposed to all type at the same time. But are you all seeing a young woman? I see both, and grapes too. Oh my gosh. So typically the two answers are it's a young woman or it's an old woman. And again, I think that can be influenced based on how we process things to form our perceptions, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about how we form our perceptions. But first, tell me, how many of you have taken a selfie and put the filters on and then posted it on social media and tried to pass that off as really you, the true, authentic you? Don't be shy. I think most of us have probably done it at some point. So obviously there's no filters going on here because y'all are seeing me in all my authenticity in this nice lighting. But we need to understand that we have to get to the reality. But how do we do that when we live in such a filtered, artificial intelligence, algorithmed world? That's the challenge right now. And so often we see the polarization of all these filters, all these varying perspectives vying for your attention, trying to pull you into their way of seeing things. We see that today. It's so rampant in this election cycle, in the COVID world, with the racial tensions. It's so easy to get lost in the varying perceptions and lose sight of reality. It's so easy for us to be able to put that curtain in front of us and pretend that we're something that we're not. It's a lot harder to remove that veil and be our authentic self for other people to come to know and understand who we really are. And we have to do the same in trying to come to know and understand the people who we're serving. We have to get to the reality. Because again, if you go back to that cycle of transformation, and we cannot love and appreciate and respect something that we don't fully understand, How can we do that if we don't know the reality of the person? If we don't know the full truth? If I don't know who you really are, how can I lead you well? So we have to be able to do the work to get to know the person. And just a little sidebar note, I love to research the etymology of words. And whenever you go to the etymology of the word perception, the root word is perceive, and it comes from the Old English language, meaning to come to know by direct experience. And I want to underline direct experience. We have to experience other people personally in order to get to know and understand who the real person is. We can't rely on the artificial world to do that. We are not leading robots, we are leading human beings. So we got to get to the root of the human being. And so much of our ability to lead someone else is our ability to gain their trust. Because if they cannot trust us, that we have their best interest at heart, they're not going to want to follow us organically. They might follow us for an interim period because they have to in some capacity. But if we truly want to form ourselves into being those true leaders, then we need to be able to get to that reality, to lead them well, to lead those humans well. So how do we do that? How do we bridge that gap and come to that reality where they can trust us? The integral link to that is in transparency. And I know that that is a scary word for some people, because when we start getting into periods of crisis and chaos, many times it's our natural tendency to retreat and kind of surround ourselves in our protective circle, maybe that executive team, where we tend to distance ourselves from the frontline people or from the junior staff. And that's the last thing that we should be doing. We need to be more visible. We need to be more accessible during these times, because they're looking to you as their leader to bring them in out of that chaos into calm in a way that they can trust that it's going to be okay. We have to instill hope in them. And the way that we do that is through full transparency. And that can be very difficult for us to do sometimes. It's hard. And that's why I said servant leadership is not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. But we need to understand the nuances of transparency. If you don't believe me, I know I keep saying that, if you don't believe me, there are statistics that prove that society is really starving for transparency, and that for those leaders, those organizations who can be transparent and do that well, then they're going to be the organizations and the leaders who are going to be successful no matter what life throws at us. We may hit a bump, we may kind of be taken off kilter a little bit, but we're going to be able to progress through life's challenges when we're being transparent. And again, I think in today's society, when there's so much distrust and there's so much of this smoke and mirror at play, especially in mainstream media, we want to know the real you. Who is the real Carlos? Who is the real Terry? Who's the real Lacey? Are you willing to be transparent to let people see that? If you are, then you're going to be more relatable to them. They're going to be able to connect with you more intimately, platonically, but intimately. So we cannot be afraid to be able to show who we really are and what's really going on in a given situation. We're not protecting them by holding things back. We're actually hurting them, you, and your organization. So if you need, for those of you who need a few study statistics, here's a couple of them for you. That 85% of employees are more likely to stick by an organization during a crisis if it has a history of being transparent. That in that crisis, they know that they're going to be able to trust the reality of what's going on because they have a leader who's being real with them, right? And so as long as you're being real, they know where they stand. Where the confusion or overwhelm or uncertainty comes from is whenever they don't know what's going on. And then they start to form their own perceptions of what that reality may be. And generally, that's not the reality. They're way off base. So having a culture of transparency in your organization is one of the things that's going to really help you to ride those waves of situational crises or societal crises. 89% say that an organization can regain their trust if it admits to the mistakes and are transparent about the steps that they're going to take to resolve those issues. So we're human, right? Again, we're not leading robots. We're not robots. So stop trying to pretend that we're infallible. We will make mistakes. It's how we handle the mistakes that's going to make the most difference in leading other people. And you'll probably gain even more respect and have more influence with people if you were honest about the mistake and how you're going to recover from it. Don't try to avoid it. Please don't try to pass the buck on to someone else. As the leaders, we assume those responsibilities. Own it. Be transparent about it. But also tell them how you're going to move forward and how you're going to correct it. So how do we build that culture of transparency? How do we cultivate that, whether it's in our organizations, our teams, in our personal circles? How do we do that? There's several things that you can do, but the first one is to be honest. Always. Please do not lie, because ultimately you will be found out, and that will destroy your credibility. They will not be able to trust you. And it's a lot harder to regain that trust whenever they know that someone has been dishonest with them than if you were just upfront from the beginning that you messed up and that we're going to learn together and move forward. So never, ever lie. You don't need to be full disclosure. I'm going to share an example of that in just a moment, but make sure that they're getting enough of the bigger picture of the realities that's going on that they need to know. The next thing is to be open and accessible. As I said, sometimes whenever we get into high stress moments or we're dealing with crisis, we tend to kind of retreat into our circle of comfort or for a self-preservation. But we do need to be open and accessible. And an example of that is that you might have that employee that is a really challenging employee for you. You still have to be accessible to that person because you're still responsible to them. You're not necessarily responsible for them and their actions and their behaviors, but you are responsible to them. So you do need to be able to provide access to you so that you can lead them well. You can't have a connection with them to be able to lead them if they can't even access you. Ask questions and show interest in them. This is huge, y'all, because as a leader, sometimes it's a barrier that we have that position of authority. And I can share with you that years ago, whenever I was in an area vice president position, I'm the type that I like to go to my agencies or regions and really get a feel for what's going on, kind of get a vibe of the morale and really be hands-on with the directors. And there was a new director who I was visiting quite frequently to go over their KPIs and whatnot. And she was worried that she was doing something wrong. So it was a little stressful for her whenever I would go to visit her agency. And after a few months, we talked about it because I could sense her tension and her angst whenever I would go. And I'm like, what's wrong? Why are you holding back and reserved? And she's like, well, you always make me nervous whenever you come. Why is my AVP coming to see me so often? Am I doing something wrong? And I'm like, no. And that's whenever I started asking her questions. It's like, I'm genuinely interested in you and care about your success. So I'm taking these opportunities to be really hands-on with you, to mentor you, to set you up for success. And so these questions that I'm asking is to get a better understanding of where you are and understanding you so that I can serve you better. So it wasn't until I was able to explain that to her that she shifted her perspective of these visits from, oh, I must be doing something bad, to, hey, I'm excited because my AVP is investing time and really showing genuine interest in me. It's very esteeming to the other person whenever you're going to take time to be intentional and show that you're genuinely interested in them. It's showing that you truly value them and what they stand for. So value your people by asking them questions about them and what they're dealing with. And don't just ask so that you can give a canned response. Truly listen to understand. The next thing is to confront those difficult situations. Many times we want to avoid it because we just don't have the emotional energy to deal with a certain situation or a certain employee, but we can't avoid it because the longer we wait to address that situation, the more difficult it's going to get, really and truly. So you may need to step away from the situation for a moment to kind of collect yourself so that you're able to come back and respond appropriately rather than just reacting negatively. So make sure that you're not avoiding those difficult situations or conversations that need to be had, because they'll know that, they're going to know where they stand with you. It's kind of like teenagers. If any of you have teenagers, knowing that they might not like what you have to say, but whenever you're confronting it in a very respectful and kind way, but not ignoring the situation, they're going to eventually come back to you whenever times are really challenging for them, because they know that they're going to get the truth from you. They know that they're going to get the reality from you, from your perspective. Provide access to information. And this is where I wanted to share a little fun story about this, that we need to provide access to information, but in a way that the recipient is going to understand what it is that you're sharing with them. And an example of that is my middle child, my son, works for a pipeline company. And, he's young, he's 22 years old, kind of just learning. And this organization had kind of made a blanket statement and promised that the employees would get a year-end bonus at the end of the year last year. And so when they were all gathering for their year-end holiday gathering, social, the owners of the company decided to make this announcement that, oh, and by the way, you're not going to get your annual bonus that we promised you. And this is why. And I have to applaud these owners that what they did is they took the company's finances, financial reports, the P&L and the balance sheet, and blew it up real big and plastered it on this wall. to show why they were not giving the bonuses that year. Well, my 21-year-old son at the time had never seen a P&L or a balance sheet before. He didn't know what he was looking at, but he honed in on one line on that balance sheet, and that was on the assets. And the CFO was talking in his, technical language to all of these like laborers and saying, that they had so many thousands of dollars lost due to theft that year, and they had had a lot of theft on their work sites. And one of the pieces of equipment on my son's crew was stolen. That was a really expensive piece of equipment. And he said, "Mom, I knew they were lying to me because the number that they had for the actual loss due to theft was not right, because that one piece of equipment that was stolen from our work site was way more than what they were reporting." And it just kind of stumped me. I said, "Well, did you talk to them or ask a question about that?" He's like, "No, I couldn't ask them that." I said, "Well, why not?" He's like, "Well, they're the owners," and he was talking all this financial stuff. I didn't understand it. But the thing is that my son didn't have the connection, the relationship with that CFO to feel like he could step up and ask that question, especially in the crowd of all the employees, right? So he just went out, and they had the meeting after the meeting. You know what I'm talking about, but it was the employees that had the meeting after the meeting to gripe about, "Did you see what they had put on there?" And I think that they were lying, and they were just feeding off of each other. So by the time my son came home, he was just in a complete tizzy. So I had to sit him down and explain to him about depreciation of assets and how that might affect a company's financial status and replacement value. So just to say, whenever you provide access to information, do be transparent about that, but make sure that the person you're trying to provide that to understands what it is that they're seeing, that they're interpreting it, that they're perceiving it in the same way that you do. And then finally, involve others in the decision-making process. Whenever you bring other people in outside of the executive team to provide insights and feedback into how we're making a decision, it gets them to buy into the decision overall. They have a better understanding of the realities that you're dealing with, and that they can bring that forward to their colleagues to help infuse that buy-in to the decision that's being made. So they don't feel like all the big decisions in the organization are happening behind closed doors, that they're privy to that information as well. So my last question for you, take a moment and reflect. What are other people seeing in you? What are the perceptions that other people have about you? What are the perceptions that you have about other people who may be different than you? Or the people who are just difficult to work with? How have you come to fully understand who they are and what they're about? And if you have not done that, then you're doing them and you a disservice. So that's the end of my presentation. I would like to open this up to some dialogue and just have some conversation with all of you. And Jill, if you are still on, Jill is going to kind of help manage the chat box. And if you want to raise your hand to ask a question or provide comments. And if you're open to it, Jill will even bring you in so that we can put you on video and we can have a conversation with one another. Are y'all open for that?
Lisa's had her hand up. I'm not too sure if that was old or whatnot. So Lisa, let us know if you have a question.
Hey, Lisa, another one of my Leadership Lafayette Best Class Ever classmates. I see that some people are having to jump off, so thank you for those of you who did join us for lunch. So those who are still on, tell me what's the one thing that stood out to you the most about this information? You can type it in the chat box, or if you want to come online, raise your hand, and we'll bring you into the conversation.
Terry says transparency is key.
Absolutely. So what is it about transparency, Terry, that resonates the most with you? And while we're waiting on Terry, Lacey, making sure you communicate to your audience in a way that they will understand. Lacey, do you have a personal experience about that, or what is it that resonated the most with you in that regard? And you can either come online where we can have a conversation on video, or type in the chat box. Make sure that you're putting to everyone so that we can see what you're saying in the chat box. Who's wanting to come online, Jill?
Lacey, I'm going to bring her on right now. Lacey, you can share your video and you can unmute yourself, or you should be able to.
All right. Sorry, I figured that'd be easier than me just typing a bunch of stuff in the box.
Yes, I would like to have conversation, right?
Well, first, thank you, Monica. That was a lot of really great information.
Thanks, Lacey.
And with what I do, I meet with a variety of different people, and I present to a variety of different people. Plus, we have the way our company is set up, we have teams in different areas of the country. So where communication, especially this year, has been key because we haven't been able to come together like we have in the past. But I know I'm now very mindful of who I'm talking to and what language I need to be speaking to them, right? And it's not to say that I'm dumbing anything down, or it's not that at all, but it's what language is going to resonate and mean something to them, and how do I need to formulate what I'm saying to make it relevant and understandable to them. And whether I'm dealing with a coworker, because we all have very different personalities, or whether I'm dealing with a new prospective prospect or client, or a new one, or just being very, very mindful of that communication piece and doing the prep work that it takes to go in to have a successful conversation.
Absolutely. And something else that I would like to share with all of you is that understanding the process of how perceptions are being formed, there's through two different processes. It's called the bottom up and the top down processing, where the bottom up is that we're filtering in the experience through sensory, through our what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're smelling, tasting, touching, right? But the top down processing is what influences that sensory input. And the top down processing comes from our knowledge, our lived experiences, our temperaments. And so if we understand that, Lacey, as you said, whenever we're communicating, if we fully understand who we're communicating to, we can communicate in a way that's going to resonate with them better, to where they can understand and connect to the information that you're trying to provide to them. Does that make sense? Okay. Thanks, Lacey. Do you have any other comments or questions?
I also liked how you pointed out, getting to know someone on a personal level. to make it more relational versus transactional. Whether again it's within an organization or it's with a client or anything like that, a customer, that understanding a person on who they actually are just strengthens that relationship. Plus, giving them the opportunity to learn who you are, it humanizes the entire process. So I'm glad you touched on that.
Well, and I like that you said that, Lacey, because I think that's been a common theme in a lot of the sessions, at least that I've attended for Innovate South, is the need for that human relation in working or leading other people, working with or leading other people. That even though we're talking about innovation and a lot of technology, we can't lose sight of the humans behind it. So thank you for pointing that out.
All right, thanks for letting me come online. I'm gonna go.
Yeah, thanks, Lacey. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay, who else? We had some other comments. Terry said, I think honesty in your company or organization starts at the top down. Yes, I agree with you, Terry, from my perspective, that we have to be the example. We have to set that example. And so if we as leaders are not being that image of honesty, then it gives others permission to be dishonest. Does that make sense? And what else?
I liked Carlos's comment about transparency. Until you define yourself, other people will try and define you.
Absolutely.
Being authentic.
Right. Because think about it, that if we're that leader and we're under that microscope, they're going to define what they're perceiving that they're seeing, right? So it's our opportunity. It's not to make excuses for ourselves, but to share with them, to let them in to who we really are, right? So that they can connect with us just as much as we need to connect with them.
I think for working closely with Catherine and Aaron and Destin, of course, but Catherine and Aaron and I are all on close to the same page in life right now. So we're all very, we have a lot of similarities in our lives right now. So we get along very well. But when it comes to work aspect, we all three work differently. Our calendars look different on how we organize things differently. And when it comes time to having those hard conversations, we've had to do that a few times, but I'm thankful to have coworkers who want to listen to me and who I like what Kelly Campbell said the other day. First, try to understand before you're understood. And I think that's important too. We're all working towards the same goal here. We just do it differently. Mm-hmm. We're all going to take different steps along the way to reach that goal. So I think it's important that we all remember that even when we're getting kind of, agitated as we do sometimes with others. And I know that was definitely always in the back of my mind when planning Innovate South, such a conference, so big. But it all works out in the end, and we all did our part. So.
Absolutely. And that's what brings strength to the team, though, right? Wouldn't you agree, Jill? Because we need that diversity on our teams so that we're bringing in all the different nuances and strengths that other people have that we don't, right?
Oh, yeah, we definitely balance each other so well.
But with that, especially in times of high stress, we want to lean into our natural temperaments that can be a little abrasive or misunderstood by the other person. And that's why I said it's so important to get to understand who they are, what makes them tick, how do they behave in certain situations, so that we can look at that and see that, no, they're not just being rude to me or like my, RBF. Isn't that I'm mad at you. I'm just very much in my head and concentrating on something, right?
Yeah.
So if you understand that about me, Jill, then whenever you walk in and I'm working on a project and see my RBF, you're not going to take offense by that, right?
Yeah, right,
So
right.
it's something very simplistic, but that's the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, I try to lean on the four agreements a lot, and want the number one being in my head being don't make assumptions, and we all do at every second of the day. Like, oh, what is that person saying about me, or what does that person think now, or he doesn't like me now, or she doesn't like how I did that. Don't make assumptions, because your brain's your worst enemy, and your anxiety and all that. So, especially about other people, because I feel like 9 times out of 10, they're not thinking about it. You are, just you.
Right. Well, and I love, what Brene Brown says about that is confronting that, right? Whenever you're feeling those insecurities or uncertainty, and I feel confrontation is kind of a strong word, but address it with the other person and say, this is the story that I'm telling myself. What's the reality, right?
Yeah. Oh, I've done that a few times, just because, and it's never what I think is going on. I'll bring it to Kat or Aaron, and I'm like, okay, this is what's going on. They're like, no, this is how. And I'm like, oh, okay, that feels a lot better that we're all on the same page here.
Exactly. And we have to be able to give ourselves the grace and space to do that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. I think Terry had a comment. So what do you say to the young leaders you encounter? What skills should they be developing? And like Brene says, be awkward and brave. Yes.
Yes. Terry, I think for me is really to stop and try to appreciate the other human in front of you first, to lead them well. And I love that about you, Terry, another one of my classmates, that Terry is one who, has his own perceptions about life and how life is lived, but he's so willing to sit and have a conversation to understand where the other person is coming from. And I think that's a beautiful thing that leaders need to have, that willingness to put ourselves aside for the other person. What's going to be best for the other person to elevate them to a higher level of success in whatever aspect of life that may be, because it's not about us, it's about them, right? I do have my little litmus test that I like to share as far as how we're influencing people, how we're interacting with people who we're serving. And basically, whenever you reflect on your interactions with that other person or group of people, ask yourself, am I elevating or am I deflating the other person, not us? Am I inviting them in to something better for their own growth, or am I just telling them what to do? Am I encouraging them where I'm infusing courage in them, or am I discouraging and I'm taking their courage away? So those are some little things that you can be asking yourself in reflecting on those encounters that you have with the people who you're trying to serve. What does that look like? Is it true servant leadership, where you have to appreciate and love the other person for who they are? Or is it more like a dictator boss? So any other questions or comments? I have that we still have a few minutes left. I have, right, Jill, 11:11 or 1:11, 11:11, 1:11.
Got one. Are there any daily exercises or practices that you recommend trying to integrate into everyday life?
I think for me, first and foremost is gratitude. Because whenever we're living in a state of gratitude, it's going to help us to appreciate the things around us and the people around us, rather than always looking for what's wrong. Because it's so easy for us to get caught in that trap of complaining or focusing on what's not right.
I will say Catherine is, sorry to interrupt you, Catherine's really good at that. Catherine's very good at staying positive and moving on with the whatever's going wrong. She's like, okay, well, that's fine, because the solution is something. There's always a way out. and always staying unbiased to things, like, and always introducing a new perspective on things, like, well, maybe this didn't go well because of this, or, always introducing that into the conversation. So I'm thankful for that, because I'm usually like, once you get on that one track mind, you're thinking, oh, this is what that is. Like we were talking about earlier, your brain thinks that. So she's really good at that.
Right. And it's not about being that Pollyanna, right? It's being genuinely grateful and seeing the good in any situation, because it is there. Sometimes we have to dig for it a good bit, but it is there. And as leaders, we're that image of hope for them, right? That whenever things are difficult, people are turning to their leaders for that hope that things will get better. But if we're the one that's always doom and gloom and complaining about things, what are we leading them to? Just more doom and gloom.
Correct.
So anything else? This is good stuff. Thank you all. I'm looking at the chat box. Anything else in the chat box?
I think that's it. All we have is Catherine, Carlos, and Terry are still on.
All right. Carlos, Terry, anything? Well, guys and gals, I really do appreciate you joining us for lunch for our very last session for Innovate South. I do want to let you know that if you need to get a little, or desire to get a little insight behind that leadership curtain, you can find me on any of our social media platforms. You are welcome to email me if you have any questions, or just comment sharing. I'd love to hear your little victories, especially from those reflections that you're going to do at the end of the year. And you can find my book on Amazon, so that might give you a little insight into servant leadership and the true need for appreciating the people that we are called to serve. So thank you all.
Thanks, Monica, and thanks everybody for sticking with us, and we'll see y'all next year.